Friends, family, lovers, enemies. Today we're going to talk about a specific scene in both the Dune movie and the book. A little compare and contrast. I want to talk about the power of the voice and how both the book and the movie demonstrate this power in different ways. I think that both the ways that it's demonstrated in the 2021 movie and the book are so effective, and I love how different they are. For, the necessary reasons. In a movie, you have to communicate things quickly. In a book, there's more time to break down the subtlety. So let's talk about it. The main scene that I'm going to use is the scene where Jessica and Paul are in the Thopter being taken to be disposed of in the desert by the Harkonnen lackeys. So I think what I'll do is just run down the scene in the movie, which is a fairly short scene, but a lot is happening in it. So basically, we're in the Thopter. Paul is sort of coming to, Jessica is gagged, and we see our characters sort of analyze the situation and try to figure out how to get out of it. The scene is great because it just demonstrates so many things about both Paul and Jessica, how observant they are, how they communicate. So the inciting action is Paul attempts to use the voice to free his mother. He fails at this and gets slapped. And Jessica then communicates to him through their hand signals that he needs to lower his pitch. You can tell that she's worried if he can do this or not. So Paul takes a beat, focuses as the Harkonnen lackeys get ready to drop them into the desert, and he attempts again. This is when he says, remove the gag, or remove her gag. He's successful. Jessica commands one of the lackeys to kill another, and she also has one of them unbind Paul's feet. He does this, but then the other lackeys are sort of caught up into the action, and one of them covers Jessica's mouth. But then at that moment, Paul, with unbound feet, is able to sort of take advantage and physically overpower one of these men, and that's when Jessica's voice is free again, and she uses it to finish off the last of the lackeys. She then frees Paul and tells him his voice was too forced. So, the main things about this scene. It's a straightforward demonstration of how the voice works. It's direct and it's spectacular. We see exactly how it works. We've seen a few other moments in the movie of the use of the voice from the Reverend Mother, and also from Jessica attempting to teach Paul how to use the voice at the beginning. And we see Paul's struggle with it versus Jessica and the Reverend Mother's prowess. So it's also demonstrating some power leveling. It demonstrates all this to the audience quickly. Obviously, this is important because it's a film and we don't have time to show the subtleties of how the voice should be used. And I think it's still effective overall for the movie because this isn't a power that Jessica's using all the time, and the moment that she's using it feels hasty, it feels important, and so she uses it in the quickest way possible. It also, with the Reverend Mother, in reference to whenever she uses the voice, she used it on Paul at the beginning of the movie to show him exactly how powerful she is, because he was sort of not understanding the level that she was at. And she also uses it again in front of the Baron and Peter when she tells the like 8-legged abomination thing to get out. And I think this scene was pretty effective in showing us power leveling as well, because it shows how she operates politically. She is sort of above all of the nobles. She's able, she doesn't really have allegiances, and the Baron respects this. I think it's such a it's such a powerful little moment. In regards to Paul's power leveling, it shows us kind of how far he has to go with controlling his powers, controlling his voice, understanding the subtleties of what he's doing. I love this because, Paul's the main character. We understand he has a certain level of power. We understand he's being sort of bequeathed the title of the Kwisatz Haderach. So as the audience watching, we think he's powerful, but then we're shown, yes, he does have some weaknesses. He does have far to go in the wielding of power. So let's compare this scene in the movie to the book, because the book is obviously going to show us. This scene in the book demonstrates so many values that I feel and themes that are important in the series overall. Paul cleared his throat. The pilot said, "Now can it?" "I don't know, Chigo." Chigo turned and said, "Ah, look." He reached out for Jessica's skirt. "Remove her gag," Paul commanded. Jessica felt the words rolling in the air. The tone, the timbre, excellent, imperative, very sharp. A slightly lower pitch would have been better, but it could still fall within this man's spectrum. Chico shifted his hand up to the band around Jessica's mouth, slipped the knot on the gag. "Stop that," Kinnett ordered. "Ah, shut your trap," Chico said. "Her hands are tied." He freed the knot, and the binding dropped. His eyes glittered as he studied Jessica. Kinnett put a hand on the pilot's arm. "Look, Chico, no need to..." Jessica twisted her neck, spat out the gag. She pitched her voice in low, intimate tones. "Gentlemen, no need to fight over me." At the same time, she writhed sinuously for Kinnett's benefit. She saw them grow tense, knowing that in this instant they were convinced of the need to fight over her. Their disagreement required no other reason. In their minds, they were fighting over her. She held her face high in the instrument glow to be sure Kinnett would read her lips, and said, "You mustn't disagree." They drew further apart, glanced warily at each other. "Is any woman worth fighting over?" she asked. By uttering the words, by being there, she made herself infinitely more worth fighting for. So the scene sort of goes on like this. It is more about subtlety. It's about de-escalation, because we can compare this scene to another scene in the book where Jessica uses the voice on Thufir Hawat, which I will read. Okay, so in this scene between Hawat and Jessica, they've basically been sort of arguing, debating on who the traitor is. Hawat is suspicious of Jessica. She's trying to convince him that someone is trying to break down the, Atreides from within, and he's really not hearing it. So he's very much convinced that she's the traitor. So she finally decides she needs to display her power. Hawat started to leap from his chair. "I've not dismissed you, Thufir," she flared. The old Mentat almost fell back into his chair, so quickly did his muscles betray him. She smiled without mirth. "Now you know something of the real training they give us," she said. Hawat tried to swallow in a dry throat. Her command had been regal, peremptory, uttered in a tone and manner he had found completely irresistible. His body had obeyed her before he could think about it. Nothing could have prevented his response, not logic, not passionate anger, nothing. To do what she had done spoke of a sensitive, intimate knowledge of the person thus commanded, a depth of control he had not dreamed possible. "I have said to you before that we should understand each other," she said. "I meant you should understand me. I already understand you. And I tell you now that your loyalty to the Duke is all that guarantees your safety with me." He stared at her, wet his lips with his tongue. "If I desired a puppet, the Duke would marry me," she said. "He might even think he did it of his own free will." Hawat lowered his head, looked upward through his sparse lashes. Only the most rigid control kept him from calling the guard. Control, and the suspicion now that the woman might not permit it. His skin crawled with the memory of how she had controlled him. In the moment of hesitation, she could have drawn a weapon and killed him. Does every human have this blind spot, he wondered? Can any of us be ordered into action before he can resist? The idea staggered him. Who could stop a person with such power? I really like the contrast of these two scenes in the book because in the Thopter, as I said, she is trying to rely on the subtlety of the voice to survive. But in this scene, she's relying on the spectacularness of the voice to survive because she's trying to prove a point to Hawat. I don't think it necessarily works on him. Like, she takes this gamble to show him because she hopes that it will help him logically see that she is not the Duke's enemy, that she could have been controlling him the entire time. But he doesn't, she takes that risk and it doesn't really work. He still suspects her. The demonstration of the voice to him makes him suspect her more because it doesn't align with his logical thinking. And that shows you right there that the power of the voice is almost unwieldy. Like, you see high-level Bene Gesserit using it well, seemingly controlling people, but really, like, how much control does the voice have in this moment? Because it doesn't work the way she wants it to. It works bombastically, but it doesn't work because he doesn't change his mind. It's such a good display of, like, the exploration of what power is, which I think these books are so important for. What is power? Who can wield it? Why do they wield it? How do they wield it? And what are the consequences of wielding it? A real Bene Gesserit is probably always using the voice to some degree. The reason the voice is such a dangerous trump card to use is because unsubtle use of it is chaotic. A person, depending on their level of consciousness, if it's higher, such as Thufir, knows when the voice is being used on them. And it also has to do with how that Bene Gesserit is using the voice. In the Thopter scene, Jessica is subtle in the Thufir Hawat scene. She's more direct because she's trying to show Thufir the level of her power. If she shows the men in the Thopter the level of her power in such a precarious moment, the consequences, they're not as easy to manage, because if someone knows that they're being controlled by the voice, their sense of powerlessness becomes a reactive element. When you're controlling someone, and this is even outside of the voice, this has to do with power dynamics of the everyday. If you exercise power over someone, subtle or not, people feel a sense of helplessness, a sense of loss of control. And depending on how reactive that person is, they might try to retake their power. So using the voice is not always a good idea, because you don't know how someone's going to react to your complete control of them. So being subtle becomes important in this situation because it's so precarious. She's trying to save her son. There's so many unknowns in this moment. This idea of the voice reminds me of George R. R. Martin's conception of prophecy, where it's a sword without a hilt. It's something that can be just as dangerous to the wielder as it is to the one who it's being exercised over. The voice is only a tool as powerful as the consciousness of the wielder. In the book, this use of it in the book demonstrates the ideals of the Bene Gesserit and the Dune novels in general. We're not powerful as people because we're granted power by structures of religion or nobility or even mind-altering drugs. We're powerful because we decide we are powerful. We decide how we use these tools of power.